What's up, guys? Welcome back to the shop. In today's video I'm going to be making a katana out of ball bearings and a little bit of twist Damascus. So to start off this video, I'm going to be cleaning up my ball bearings, making sure that they have no oils or residues on them to help them forge weld the better. And I'm going to be doing them in a canister, and I'm going to be lining the canister with these guys. I'm going to be trying to do a layer of ADCR V2, then some ball bearings, then ADCR V2, then some ball bearings, and I'm going to put steel powder in there. That way I can create a bit of a contrast. Then I'm going to give it a twist to create some more contrast, and I'm hoping it's going to look very, very cool. And I sprayed my can ahead of time with some white spray paint to help releasing the billet from the can. Now this is the most difficult part out of most of what I'm doing, and that is trying to get a single layer of these 1/4 inch ball bearings in there. That way I can evenly space everything in. It'll fit roughly proportionate. That way I don't have uneven thicker parts and uneven thinner parts whenever I go for my twist. Though I'm sure that's going to vary as I forge it. You know, things move around whether I like it or not. So that's going to tend to happen. Also, a quick disclaimer, I've never owned a katana, nor have I made one. I'm just making this off the top of my head and a little bit of research that I have done. But it's all for fun, so yeah, don't be a hater in the comments because nobody cares. I'm not Japanese, I am Mexican. So I do not claim to be like an expert on this. I'm just doing this for fun. So yeah, it is what it is. Don't be a hater. Don't complain. Nobody's gonna give you the attention that you want in the comments. Though I might troll you a bit because, you know, shits and giggles. But other than that, don't be that guy. And if you're new to the channel, this is the first time you're seeing this video. If you've been here for a while, this is actually a re-edit of an old video that I made about a year ago, before I was doing my voiceovers explaining why and how I do the things that I do. And I've had a lot of people asking for one where I am actually explaining it, so that's why I decided to do this. And though I've missed the very first press, I always press from top to bottom to consolidate everything, and then I start pressing on the sides to make sure that everything gets nice and condensed. We're looking for about 1/3 of the initial billet to get condensed down, maybe a little bit less because I already had the ADCR V2 that I put in there, which isn't going to compress. Normally what we're doing is compressing the powder, and that normally takes about 1/3 to be able to become a solid. So now that my billet is pretty consolidated, I'm working down the corners to get a nice clean release. I can see inside the billet through the cracks, and I can see that it's all nice and solid. So by working in the corners and hopefully not having any kind of weird folds, the billet should slide right out. Here I'm having a little trouble. It's a little stuck in there because it has that one curve there, but fortunately when I drop it and almost burn myself, it actually loosens it up inside and it helps me release it. And that is a nice clean release, and the only reason that it releases that clean is because of the nice thick layer of white spray paint that I put on the can beforehand. Now the white spray paint has to be white spray paint because it is the titanium oxide in the paint that makes it white, that also has the effect of creating a barrier that doesn't let the billet or the insides of the can stick to the actual can itself. So here all I'm going to do is try to draw it out to about a 1 inch by 1 inch block. That way I can twist it. And I will do that by slowly pressing on both sides, trying not to, you know, destroy the billet because it is a whole bunch of ball bearings with some powder in there, and it's actually quite fragile if it's not forge weld correctly. So it's always a risk, especially whenever we get to the twist. It's always going to be a risk of delaminations and whatnot. Here I'm using some 3/4 inch kiss blocks to work it down to 3/4 inch to make the twist easier, because I decided while I was doing it that 1 inch by 1 inch is way too thick for me to twist by hand. I probably could still, but it would just be a lot more difficult than it ended up being, and it ended up being pretty difficult if I do say so myself. So after straightening out the billet, I'm knocking down the corners, getting it octagonal or round. And the reason why we do this is to minimize the chances of delamination with those sharp corners whenever we go for our twist. Now if you watch me for some time, you'll realize that the press that I'm using right now, which is the same press that I use currently, but I've done some modifications to make it work better. First of all, I put some ears on the side to make it press more consistently, and I've put on some wheels with stoppers on them, which actually makes it a lot easier to twist. Here the wheels are free, they don't have any kind of stopper to them, so I lose a lot of my force whenever I'm trying to twist because the hydraulic press likes to move side to side, and that makes it a lot more difficult than it should be. But somehow I manage. So here I am straightening out the billet once again, that way I can flatten it out with my flat dies. If you can see towards the front part of the billet, there are definitely some areas where it is shearing a little bit. Alright guys, so I did a quick etch just to see, you can see the ball bearings in there on the twist, just to see how the pattern is looking, and so I can figure out exactly where I want to do my cut so I can start actually forging out from this billet. So it's looking very nice. I like the pattern. Now this isn't going to be the final pattern after I'm done forging and everything. Things are going to move and grinding is going to clean it up a lot, but I'm trying to find that right spot where I need to cut it so that the tip of my sword gets a really nice piece of the pattern. And now that the billet is ready, I'm just working down those high spots to get a nice even finish. Though I should have actually ground those out instead of working them like this, but because I was low on time, and this was for a challenge build that I did last year, the Samurai Challenge, I decided just to press them down. I figured they would grind out whenever I ground the knife, but yeah, that becomes a problem down the road. Ideally, I would grind those out before I started pressing on them, but I believe that you learn from your mistakes, and therefore, hopefully, I don't do this again in the future, and I learn from my mistakes on this sword. So here I am hammering in the tip, trying to get it as nice and uniform as possible. Right now the billet is still over 1/4 of an inch thick, so it does not like to move as easily as I would want, but we get it done with this 3.5 pound hammer. And with the tip ready, I'm going to start hammering in my bevels on both sides, trying to get a little bit more width on this billet. From here on, it really is just a whole bunch of hand hammering, getting those bevels in, and periodically straightening out my sword. That way it doesn't banana off too much to one direction or the other. Now this was a very, very, very challenging thing. I have never forged anything quite this big, and it was definitely very challenging, and I learned a lot from the process. And it helped me realize that even though it is quite a big sword, at least compared to what I've made in the past, it really is more daunting in your mind than it actually is once you get down to it. So if you're ever in a predicament, specifically to the makers that watch me, and you're like, man, I don't know if I can do it, hey, there's only one way to find out, and that's by trying. Worst you can do is ruin some material, and trust me, I have ruined a lot of material since I started this journey. So if you're not sure, you can always start with some leaf spring, and you can work from there until you get into the more expensive stuff that you don't want to waste, which, trust me, sometimes you just end up wasting whether you like it or not. It's all part of the learning experience. And now that the sword is roughly forged to shape, I'm going to do the rest of my shaping on the grinder. And I'm going to fine tune all my smaller details. There's not really much to explain during this part of the process other than just grinding up to your lines. Now, forging is a fun part, but grinding is a big part of knife making in general. And thank God I live in the 21st century, because I cannot imagine having to do this with like stones or just files. So that's awesome, because this sword took a solid while to grind down to get it ready for heat treating. Alright guys, so I'm at a predicament. I cannot, hold on, let me get this thing focused. Alright, I cannot get rid of this right here. I have to grind a lot deeper, and I'm already at a pretty good thickness throughout the sword. I don't want to really thin out my point more. So even if I bevel up my bevels, grind in my bevels, which I will do shortly, I'm not going to get rid of that. I can get rid of this pretty easily when I grind up my bevels and, you know, do my final grind, but not this. And I also have this little blemish right here, which I gotta get rid of. Phone keeps unfocusing and focusing, but I gotta get rid of it. So like right around there. So I'm thinking I'm gonna end up having to cut the sword short, which sucks because I spent a lot of time forging in this tip, but it is what it is. I'm running short on time, so I'm gonna cut the tip in, and then grind in my bevels. It's gonna be shorter than I wanted, but I think it's still long enough to be considered a katana. So that's what I'm going for. So in that small hiccup, I lost about 4 inches on the overall length of my blade. I was going for 28. I ended up with a 24. But one quick Google search later made me realize that a sword is about 24 to, I believe it was like 30, 32 inches is a regular katana. So I'm still going to call it a katana. And here I'm fine tuning small details with a hand file, getting that tip of the sword, which is very difficult to grind in, getting it nice and clean. And here's one of many of my tempering cycles that I did to get the sword ready for our quench. It's very cool how after you quench a knife and you clean off a little bit, you can see all the individual parts, all the different ball bearings, and roughly what your pattern is going to look like whenever you etch it. It's very, very cool looking. And after tempering the sword, we're going to go on and give it our final grind. One thing I learned while grinding these long swords is it's very difficult to keep them nice and straight. And because of that, I ended up doing a lot of my grinding, a lot of my final grinding towards the end with my grinder on the tilted. That way I can take advantage of the whole 8 inches of the platen to get my sword nice and straight. And finally, we go on ahead and hand sand, and this literally took hours and hours to do. And speaking frankly, it's definitely not one of my favorite parts, but it is essential to get a beautiful etch. So it's always better to do and not to skip this part. It's always worth it in the end. And now with the blade portion of this done, we're going to move on to the Suba. For the Suba, I was originally just going to make it out of copper, but I decided that I wanted something special to tie it into the full sword. So I ended up using ball bearings and layered it with a core steel That is just a mild steel piece to fill in the gap on the center and help me make a very nice looking sand mine. And layering it on top again with more ball bearings and more steel powder. That way it ties back into the sword and it has a wow factor that just a regular copper Suba would not really have given me. And I don't really have anything that I can really do to that copper to make it pop without clashing with everything else, so I felt this was the best way to go about it. And I was happy with the final look of it, so I definitely felt like this was definitely the right choice for it. And we're going to treat this as any canister that we forge weld. We're just going to forge weld it on all sides, consolidate it as best as we can, and it will pop off after a little while by itself because I prepped it ahead of time with the white spray paint. And they tend to actually pop a lot easier whenever it's a welded construction because my welds are not the best, so they definitely give in pretty quickly, but they hold long enough to give a nice solid and consolidated billet. And just to show how easily it does come apart, here I'm just gonna rip off the end with some pliers. And now that our billet is out, all we're gonna do is get it to a nice consistent thickness, and we'll be cutting out our Suba from here. While the Suba cools down after forging, I'm going to start on my other pieces for my sword. Here I'm taking a piece of copper and I am annealing it by heating it up and quenching it in water. Copper acts the exact opposite as a high carbon steel, and therefore by doing this we actually soften the metal and make it more malleable. And here I'm using a jig that I made off of watching a Redbeard Ops video where he made something similar, and I believe Walter Sorrells also make something similar. And this is to better help me shape my habaki for this sword. And once it's fitted to the sword, I just cut off all the excess and get it ready for soldering. And now that the Suba steel has cooled down, I'm grinding it down with my diamond wheel, getting the surface prepped so we can turn it into an actual Suba for the sword. Alright guys, so I've been sitting inside making templates. So this is going to be the template for my guard or my Suba, and this is going to be for the spacers, the seppa that go on both sides of this guy. So I made them in here out of cardboard, and I'm just going to transfer them over to whatever materials I'm going to be making out of. This one, the canister Damascus, and this guy for copper. And with our templates made, I'm going to go on ahead and cut the seppa or the spacers out from this thin sheet of copper that I got from Lowe's, which is just a regular big box store. I think it ran me about $4. Not too bad. The bad part was having to file it out with these tiny little files, getting it nice and clean. One thing I learned during this whole process is that grinding copper is an absolute pain. It heats up very, very quickly, and it definitely burns your fingers as you go through. And with those guys ready, all I have left to do is make my Suba nice and round, which I do with the help of my 2x72. And we drill our center hole and just file away. And now it's time to start on the handle, and I commit complete sacrilege and I use a Dremel tool to carve out the inside of my handle. I do not have a special chisel for this kind of work, but I do plan on making a wakizashi in the near future, and I will be buying specific tools for doing that. That way I can carve it exactly the way it is intended to be done and make it fit better. But for now, that's what I had and that's what I used. And I used some Type Bond 3 to glue the two pieces of the handle wood together. While making this handle, I didn't really have much of a reference to what I needed to do, thickness or anything like that, so I kind of just winged it and made an oval shape around it and tried to get it as comfortable as I needed to for my hand. And with the handle shaped, it's time to start on the handle fittings, which are the Kashira and the Fuchi. And I know I'm more than likely pronouncing all those names wrong, but cut me some slack. I don't speak the language, so I'm trying the best that I can. And I'm just shaping these guys to the size of the handle to make sure that they fit. And we're gonna get them to hold together with a little bit of soldering. Also, this was the first time that I soldered with this project, so surprisingly it didn't go too bad, but I definitely have a lot of work to do on getting those soldering skills a lot better. Here I am marking out the caps from my other sheet of copper, and I'm going to cut them out and solder those to the top. That way I can fit them up to the actual handle. Once again, let me remind you, copper does absorb heat very, very well, so it heats up very fast and definitely burns your fingers, so make sure to always keep it cooled down frequently. And first we're going to start by drilling our holes for our Fuchi, and this is the part that is going to be on the top of the handle and where the sword is going to go through to go into the slot in the handle. I think if I do end up making another sword next time, I will make these pieces out of steel because it is a lot easier for me and I don't really have the proper tooling for that, but I can make a nice seamless weld versus having to go through the trouble of a lot of the soldering and a lot of the different headaches that come with working with copper versus working with steel. Though I'm not sure if that will affect the actual weight of the sword too much or not, but I guess that's a bridge I'll have to cross when I get there. And here I'm heat treating my Suba. By heat treating it, I'm not really sure what the actual name for the process is, but it definitely helps it get a nice and a darker etch whenever I do my final etch and coffee etch. And with all my pieces prepped, I'm going to hit them with a Scotch-Brite. And I'm going to be doing something special for this sword to make it pop. It is for a competition with other knife makers. And my skills are definitely subpar compared to some of them that make some really great pieces. This is something I've never done before. And I'm going to try something I've never done before either. And I'm going to give the copper a blue shipwreck patina, I think it's called, and I'm gonna be using salt with a little bit of white vinegar, and I'm gonna induce that patina onto the copper, and by doing so it should get a nice bluish greenish color. And pretty much what you have to do to get this done is you're going to mix copper with some distilled white vinegar and put it all over the pieces. Make sure it has good contact. Afterwards, I also sprinkled some extra salt on top just in case. And then you're going to take some ammonia. This is clear ammonia. It's an all-purpose cleaner I got at Walmart, and you're just going to put some in a little cup and you're just going to sit it up in there. The vapors from the ammonia over time will react with the distilled vinegar and the salt, and it will create that effect that we are looking for, but it will take some time, so it's important to put it somewhere where it's nicely ventilated because the ammonia is very strong, and leave it out for a couple of hours or days. And this is what we get. This is our final look. And to help seal it and keep it from falling off, I'm going to spray it with some clear enamel, and that will help give it a layer of protection and hopefully protect the sword as well. Since this has salt, I'm not sure if it will over time rust it or not. And here I'm going to take the handle and I'm going to spray it black just to help hide any inconsistencies, since I'm not doing a race skin wrap on this. Very not traditional, but I'm also not a traditional guy. I don't really do this, so I'm not going to give it as a historical look, but I'm going to make it look pretty cool, at least in my eyes. So here I'm using some super glue to get those pieces back on there and make sure they stay, and I'm going to be doing my wrap on this knife once I got those two pieces on. Now for my wrap, I'm going to be using black leather, and I'm going to be doing a traditional Ito wrap, but I'm using leather instead of actual Ito, which I believe that the traditional Ito wraps were done with some kind of cotton or something like that. I have some here in the shop, but I wanted to go with leather because that black will definitely grab on and help everything else pop better. Now, I had to watch a lot of tutorials on how to do this because it's definitely a very difficult wrap to do, and I've never done one of these before, but I do think it came out pretty nice. And that copper with the patina underneath that pops out through those little diamond shapes definitely came out great and came out exactly how I had envisioned. And overall, I think it looks pretty cool. And now all that's left is to go on ahead and etch all my pieces. I'm going to be starting with my Suba. And while it etches, I'd like to ask you guys to like, comment, and subscribe. 90 something percent of my viewership is not subscribed, so if you enjoy these videos, if they provide any kind of value, whether it's entertainment or you learn something, please consider giving me a follow. I would greatly appreciate that. And if you want to help me in a more monetary way, I do have a Patreon I just launched, and I'm working on that. Bear with me. I will have some very cool stuff there for you, so if you want to check that out, it will be in the description down below, as well as on my website. I will have knives up shortly. I'm working to get a batch of knives out for you guys, and hopefully within the next week I will have something out, so be sure to be on the lookout for an announcement on that. And our sword is looking absolutely great. We're gonna go into our coffee etch. And I'd also like to thank you guys for all your support. I won't be able to make cool things like this without your guys' support and you guys backing me up through the years that I've been doing YouTube, so I really appreciate that. Oh, and I also forgot to mention I have very subpar samurai skills, so here's the final look at the sword. I hope you guys enjoyed the build, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace.